Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello, and welcome to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, or the Groundwork podcast, or whatever it is called, and welcome to the idea that maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that you and I, dear listener, have built 100 episodes of it together. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh, and I am truly and really in disbelief that I have made it here to 100 episodes. And I just want to make so crystal clear at the outset that I unequivocally could not have done this without you. I could not have done this without you tuning in, without you choosing to spend your precious, precious time listening to these episodes as you drove in cars, as you fixed fences, as you farmed, as you did dishes, wherever you were. I am so grateful to you. And so thank you. I have a bit of a different episode planned. So over the course of about the last year, I have been deeply considering the lessons that I gleaned in the act of doing this podcast, which I will say, this is the most I have ever stuck to anything in my life that was entirely my own. I have never gotten so far into a project. I have never committed to something so wholeheartedly, even though there were some stumbles along the way, which I'll talk about. And so this is a place of big achievement for me. And I know that it was something that I did it with you. I did it with our guests. I did it with the help of so many people, especially Josh, who was incredibly instrumental in editing, in listening to me go on and on about different guests, different topics of play interviewing with me. And so this is a collaboration. This wasn't done on my own, but these lessons are things that I feel like I needed to learn and that I wanted to share with you about what it is meant to do this podcast. And I think within it, what it is meant to do life, and maybe a little bit of a mirror that the personal is really so much of the collective. And some of the lessons in here that I see are sort of mirrored writ large in a cultural sense, which I'll sort of sum up at the end. But for now, I want to lean into celebration. That's hard for me. And I really do want to celebrate this achievement. So if you want to celebrate this achievement with me, please go to social media, my least favorite place, but the place that I most love connecting with you. Share a favorite episode or two, share a blurb, make sure that you are followed and subscribed, and please, please consider leaving a rating or review. It might seem small. It takes you about 5 seconds, but it makes a big impact on other people finding this podcast for, big announcement, its next 100 episodes. Because as hard as it was for me to get here to episode 100, I plan on getting to episode 200. So we have a lot more room to grow. And I want you here with me and in it. And I want to find some other ears in that process. I had a lot of ideas of how 100 episodes would look. I thought that I would do a massive rebrand and that I would do all of these giveaways and that I would have this all prepared ahead of time. And I am coming at you from Monday, January 6th, just now recording this episode. And I have had not a moment to be able to rebrand or put together giveaways or do all of these things because I have also been working. This is not my full-time gig. And I really I really want to mention and remember that as I kind of reflect on 100 episodes, that this is something that I have given my life to, but it comes with farming and helping to run the back end of a butcher shop and a consulting career I'm building myself and some writing that I'm doing. And as I lean into the next 100 episodes, I will need your support in other ways. And as much as my intention was to announce those wonderful ways here on this episode, I haven't yet. But just know that I could use your support and that more ways to support are coming. I'm really excited to dig into these lessons, and I am so grateful to our sponsor, Redmond Real Salt, who has been there with me even through some of my trips and falls. And they have brought me into their space. I got to tour their mine in October, which crossed something off my bucket list. I got to be in a salt mine. And I just think their products are so incredible. I actually have a shipment of salt that I'm waiting for today, and I've gotten to the bottom of the crock and am desperate for it and excited for it because it is the best tasting salt mined right here in America from an ancient seabed that has been protected from pollutants, and they are incredible. So you can get 15% off using the code mindbodysoil_15 by going to redmond.life. I'll have more to say about that later. In the interim, thank you. You sponsored this podcast with your ears, with your attention, with your sweet messages and emails. You have been the reason for this to continue, and I am forever grateful. And so now we're going to dig into some of these lessons, and I hope it felt really good for me to reflect on them and to codify them. I hope that you find that they add something for you. So the first thing, and I think that I put this first because this is kind of the first for me in life, one of my core values, core tenets, which is to stay awake to your curiosity. And I crafted that sentence really carefully. It wasn't be curious, because I think we are naturally curious beings. I think that curiosity is ingrained into us. And then I think in culture, it's inculcated for us to ignore it, to be numb to it, to anesthetize it, to sleep on it. And so in that, I wanted this to be stay awake to your curiosity, not the quashing that happened in school, that the quashing that happens in adulthood, right? Like everywhere we turn, there are reasons to stop being curious or to just turn that little nagging feeling that curiosity is, and to numb it, to put it away. This podcast began as a lifelong dream. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but not a lifelong dream, but a 4 to 5 year long dream that I hadn't been able to commit to, that I hadn't been able to do. And I was sure at the outset that it was going to be a podcast about health and wellness and regenerative farming. Today, while I'm not sure what the podcast is precisely, it's not that. And the only reason that I have been able to evolve with this organism in co-creation with you, in co-creation with each and every guest, has been curiosity. I stayed awake to it, and I let my own curiosity lead me wherever it ended up going. And that wasn't a linear path in any stretch of the imagination. What started as health and wellness is now a lot about supply chains, about materials, about economics. But, and I hope that it still retains this sort of fun camaraderie and dips back into agriculture, which I truly believe is at the heart of so many of how the world has been built, right? Like agriculture is at the heart of how the world has been built for the last 10,000 years. And what I want to do is to begin to uncover that, but in uncovering that, it's a little piece of everything. It's so multidimensional that we can't just explore one thing, that each thread pulls at the other. And as guest after guest came on and they mentioned new books and they mentioned new ideas, there were rabbits that I had to chase down holes that I never expected to go down. And if I hadn't been awake to my curiosity, I wouldn't have found myself here. And I love here. I have surprised myself in this process of following my curiosity and letting it lead. I have grown an immense amount. I have made relationships and friendships that I never expected. And so at the heart of this is lesson number 1, which is stay awake to your curiosity. In October, I had the pleasure of visiting Redmond Real Salt in Utah, something that I discussed a little bit in an October episode. And I have to tell you, the lessons that I learned there are still with me. They're still percolating. And I was looking back through, they took us on the first night, and it was this group of incredible humans, and we had some really deep conversations. And one of the things that came up was that wonder opens up more wonder. And as I record this episode and I place the first lesson at stay awake to your curiosity, I think this is a big part of it. That our wonder, our curiosity opens us up to possibility. And this was another piece of something I learned at Redmond, which are that times of change, times when we are changing, when times are changing, that is also when things are most possible, that it's not a curve of change, but it is a curve of possibility. And I know it might seem a little impossible that salt could open up everything that is possible. But when I think about the incredible processes that take an ancient seabed from the Jurassic era, cover it with volcanic ash that becomes bentonite clay, and bake that for millennia until a group of cows start licking the soil and some farmers notice and find a massive vein of salt underneath, and that salt is so rich in 60 plus trace minerals that it is a nourishing part of connecting us back to nutrients forged in the stars. I think salt actually might have a lot to teach us about what is possible. I am so grateful to today's sponsor, Redmond Real Salt, whose salt and Relight hydration powder and immunity powder, which I've been playing with, and their new Relight Kids hydration powder that is a little lower in sodium, some beautiful bright colors with organic fruit and vegetable juices, are just some of my favorites from them. And in the mail, I'm actually waiting today for my 25-pound bag of salt to arrive. I go through about 2 of them every year, and I grind it for various applications and various sizes. I think about just how much salt adds to our lives, that it is the thing that gives things flavor, and it gives us the energy and electron connectivity to be our salty selves. So with that, I want to thank our sponsor, Redmond Real Salt. You can buy any of their products right now. I'm loving Strawberry Lemonade Relight. I'm loving their 25-pound bulk bags, and I'm loving the Relight Kids, even as an adult, at redmond.life. And with the code mindbodysoil_15, you can get 15% off. Again, that's redmond.life and the code mindbodysoil_15 for 15% off. And now back to wonder and awe and this episode of lessons I've learned in 100 episodes. And in some ways, lesson number 2 is really integrated into this, which is be open and adaptable. Let the wind change your shape. Now, you might have heard in episode 98 with Frances Weller when I talked about an experience I had this summer where I watched a massive windstorm come through the valley where the farm sits and break off a branch of a very beloved tree of mine. And in the wake of that, I've been thinking a lot about how we are shaped by environmental forces, right? How the tree is shaped by the wind. And sometimes you'll see this on a cliffside. You'll see a tree that really just flows with the wind. It's bent over, its branches are all going one direction. But the truth is that in all environmental situations, we are shaped by the forces that we are exposed to and the forces we choose to expose ourselves to. And I think that, especially as somebody who would describe themselves as quite rigid, right? I love routine. I'm very predictable. I like to eat the same things. I can be a little bit inflexible. But this podcast has taught me that we have to let the wind change us. And I said this at the beginning of a lot of episodes, which is this guest changed my life. And it might sound hyperbolic, but every time it was true. Every time the incredible force of a guest's work and their ideas and their vulnerability and their graciousness on coming on the episode, it completely changed me and who I was because I let it. I let myself be that tree in that windy environment that is changing shape as I grow and experience all of these forces that are outside of me. And I think it's because of that the podcast could change shape too, that it could be something that was rooted in health or wellness or regenerative agriculture, whatever it was, and it could be whatever it is today. And I don't actually feel the need in this precise moment to put a label on that. I followed my interest and I let it lead where it led, right? I think some about dancing with this, that when we are with our curiosity and our own ability to be adaptable, right? We have a dance partner that we are letting lead, and that dance partner is both us and the environment and all the people we come into contact with. And I think that by being open and that allowing for open and recursive structure that allows in feedback in order to change, right? That feels the wind and the sun and the seasons and the other plants around it and the squirrel that's climbing its bark. Like when we are that tree, we can't be in a tight and rigid niche down space, which I'll talk a little bit about later. We have to be something that is more fluid and adaptable. And so this has taught me that you have to let the wind change your shape, to be open, to be adaptable, all while staying awake to your curiosity. So my third lesson is to be persistent and learn to take up space. And this is a really big one for me and a difficult one, because this is, okay, so there's two parts to this. The first is to be persistent. I am not a persistent person, mostly because I am terrified of being an imposition to anybody at any given time. Not too long ago, I received an email from a guest who I had sent quite a few emails to, and she hadn't responded. And she said, "I want to reward your cheerful persistence." And this podcast has taken so much cheerful persistence that I never thought I would be able to do. I'm not great at marketing myself. I'm not great at selling myself. I'm not great at taking up space. But I learned that while I'm normally a person that is loath to send a single follow-up email, that there were times when, in order to be seen, to get what I wanted, I had to send, and I kid you not, this is wild, dozens of follow-up emails to get a guest on. And I do want to leave you with this small note. I would never hound a guest if they said no. If they said no, I always desisted and stopped. And I also left a lot of space between emails. So it wasn't just this sort of really obnoxious persistence, but it was persistence in a way that made me personally really uncomfortable. And I kept coming back to a book. It's Alex Banayan's The Third Door. And there's this concept, right, that there's this club and there are 3 ways to get in. You can get in from the VIP line, or you can stand in line to get in, through the bouncer. Or you can find the third door, right? It's the door in the alley through the kitchens. It's, the basement door. It's that third door that you haven't considered. And in this book, he talks about getting to sit down and have conversations with some people that would be considered very unreachable. And I always took a lot of inspiration from this book. And it was really hard for me to be persistent in my pursuit of people who I felt would be an incredible fit for the podcast, whose knowledge base would fit like a puzzle piece into what we were discussing. And it was really hard for me to take up that space. And I don't think that I'm fully realized in any regard in this department of learning to take up space, which is this second part of things. Because in order to be that persistent, I had to feel like I deserved to take up space in somebody's inbox, that this concept, this little podcast could deserve to be seen and deserve to find some of these voices and guests of people that I was really passionate about, and to feel like I could take up space in my passion and in my own expertise and ability to create a container for conversation that was worthwhile. And again, as somebody who always feels like an imposition as a human being, this was really hard. And so I keep coming back to this, not just this piece around persistence, but also this piece around allowing myself to take up space. I do not have to be small. I can be big. And I deserve this space that I have carved out for myself. And all of that might sound like the biggest cliche, but it is so true for me, and it is so true for you too. You deserve to be here. You deserve to take up space. You do not have to be small. Your dreams, the spaces you're making, they deserve to be seen and to be shared. And I think within that, I actually want to talk about our dreams a little bit. And so this is our 4th lesson, which is our dreams can be really heavy, but that heaviness can lend itself to momentum as much as it can to being almost burdensome. So there's a little bit of a backstory to this one because I know that was a big mouthful. In July, I went to the MIT Museum in Boston where I saw an artist's work. So Arthur Ganson makes these incredible integrated little geared machines. And I don't think I've ever been more enchanted in a museum exhibit than I was in this one. And he's very encouraging that whatever interpretation you make of his work is what he wants. He wants you to interpret it for yourself. And in this exhibit, there was a piece called Machine with Wishbone. And in it, there was this wishbone that had been made to walk on a track where it drags this machine. And the action of the wishbone walking on the track powers the machine to run. And they create this sort of symbiotic relationship. You can look it up online if you feel so called to. And I sat there and I cried in this museum because in my interpretation, I felt like that wishbone, wisher, a dreamer. And I saw the weight that this wishbone was carrying. It canted forward, really pulling this heavy, big load. And I realized how heavy my dreams were for me at times, that they were so big. And as someone who often feels small, who has troubles getting into action, who has troubles organizing myself, sometimes the weight of my dreams feels crushing. And, I talked about this again in episode 98 some, but I really struggled a lot this summer. And I never really know how to talk about this, right? But I struggled with whether or not I really wanted to be here, to stay here. And the timber of it wasn't that I didn't have anything to live for. In fact, it was really the opposite. It was that I had so much, but I didn't feel that I had the capacity to be able to make it. I didn't have the capacity to put my dreams into actions, and they were just weighing me down like a ton of bricks. And there was a lot more to it than that, but that was the sort of the gist of it. The gist being the Dutch word for yeast, was at the heart of it. It was at the proliferation of it. And I think a lot of you might know the story of how I started this podcast, that it had been in my heart for 4 or 5 years before I finally turned the mic on, before I finally did it. And I've said this many, many times, but I really only turned the mic on once I had become so thoroughly sick of myself, because I felt like that dream of this podcast had gone to rot inside of me, had turned necrotic, was making me physically ill, that the dream was persistent in its desire to come forward, and it kept being met by my own inaction. And that had made me sick. And to this day, this podcast is truly the single best thing I've done for my health. However, I find myself again a little bit unable to fully learn this lesson, because this podcast has opened up new and bigger dreams. And once again, I find myself faced with some of that reticence to achieve them, that I don't feel ready, that I don't feel like enough. And in not going after them, they have become this unbearable weight that I am dragging around with me, this burden. But what I'll say, having transformed that burden once before, is that when you choose to step into the heaviness of your dreams, that weight can just as easily create a lot of momentum, because it is your passion, it is your joie de vivre, it is your raison d'etre, it is how you are showing up in this life, and that can just absolutely snowball into something incredible, like having 100 episodes under your belt. And so our dreams can be heavy, and that heaviness can work for or against us. And I think that is an important lesson that I am here to keep learning. And I actually think with that, I want to go into lesson number 5, which is, it is enough. Whew. This is another really heavy one. It is enough. There is enough. I am enough. I really do hate to say it, but I have to repeat these words to myself over and over. And it's something that I've decided to do very consciously recently, to say this to myself, to reassure myself, and to begin to see all the abundance and enoughness that surrounds me. I think there are those of us that, by way of our childhoods or by way of just our constitutions, our nature, we will never feel like we have done enough to be worthy. And I am one of those people. And I additionally think that as humans, we are wired for scarcity. I think Michael Easter explores this in Scarcity Brain. Like we are wired to be concerned that there is not enough to drive us forward into survival. And recently, I've really been trying to catch myself as I slip into that scarcity mindset. I have this little example. I didn't really realize I was an overeater, but I realized that after each and every meal, I would be too full, and it would be uncomfortable, and I really didn't like the feeling. And I actually think that being just as a real backdoor brag, being a pretty good chef played into this, because my food is delicious and I always want to eat more of it. And I would have this feeling that there wouldn't be more tomorrow. And I've been checking in with myself instead and checking into the sensation that's in my stomach. Am I full? And when I am full, but I want to take more bites because it's delicious, because I'm scared that it won't be there tomorrow, which is ridiculous because I eat the same things over and over again. But we are not rational beings, us tiny humans. So I catch myself in that. I feel the feeling in my stomach and I say, there is enough. There will be more tomorrow. There will be more next week. There's enough for me to fill up on without having to gorge and wait out the next famine. And I know that that's the fear, right? That I must absorb all the food, all the love, all the resources, because I never know when they'll go away. And even now, that is really hard for me to say. And I think that within that, I have really turned this into me, that I am not enough, that there is not enough, and that I myself am not enough for others. And so it's kind of this double-edged sword. And so what I have done, since I am not enough, since I am afraid of taking up space, since I am afraid of my own big dreams, is that I have set such a high standard for myself that I will never really be able to fulfill it. And this is a standard that I set for myself. I don't set this for others. I don't look at the work of others and hold them to the same stringent, punishing, punitive standards that I hold myself to. But me, I am never enough. And I think that there's a specialness to that statement too, right? That I am apart from others in how unique I am in not being enough, that I must climb to the top of the mountain, flogging myself the whole way up in order to climb another mountain once I get there, right? That false summit. Flogging myself the whole way there to maybe be close to enough, right? I need to do 30 hours, not 20 hours of research on a guest. I need to be that much more prepared in order to be on remotely even footing with anyone else in this space. And so this piece of me that doesn't experience enough in my life, though there is so much, and I'm really beginning to see that now, also doesn't feel that I am enough for this life and that I'm too much, which I've already talked about. We'll talk a little bit about holding paradox as humans. But I have to believe that. I have to know that it is enough and that I am enough in order to do this. And I even had troubles in preparing this episode because I imagined, right, and I said this at the outset, that it would come with a rebrand and giveaways and all of this fuss. But I had to remind myself when I got here, and I've been just buried in work for the last month, and so I haven't had time to craft this the way I had imagined, that this right here, what I have prepared, is enough. I got here. I got to 100 episodes. That's so much more than enough that enough can't even figure into the conversation. And I have enough. I have enough joy and enough love and enough in this life. And I think that's a tough one. And it actually leads me into number 6, which is you're not special. I covered this also in episode 98. Very pivotal episode. Lots of people are really loving it, so I really recommend that you tune in. But in it, we talk about something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is you're not special, and it's in the best possible way. I think that one of the things we really deeply miss in not living in tribal bands of community like we might have as hunter-gatherers or even as early agrarians is the opportunity to see people in all of their different states, to see them in their triumph and their pain, to see them, naked and uncomfortable, to see them clothed and, in their element. All of these different pieces, I know those are funny. Hopefully they make sense as I come into this. All of these different pieces, we miss the chance to see one another as we are when we don't have the masks up and the boundaries up. was thinking about this a lot as I was attending holiday parties. I had this conversation with a good friend who really struck me because I was sharing something a little bit vulnerable about who I am in this more inner life. And it surprised her because it's not the me that she's familiar with. And I think that this is really frequently the case, right? That we wear these masks in one way or another for the relatively short amounts of time that we spend with others, and we present this face to the world. And it is one of our faces. I've always been a little reticent about the word masks because I think that we're a very multifaceted, many-faced being with a lot of different presentations of how we show up in the world. And so, of course, we wear masks. But if people only see this sort of couple of facets of ourselves and they don't see the other, then there's kind of this disconnect. But I think that when we were in close and more constant contact of community, it wouldn't have been the case that we only would have seen a couple of facets of the people that surrounded us. We couldn't have kept up these sort of different personas because we would have been together constantly. We would have been in community where we would have seen people tired and aching and doubting. We would have seen other bodies, right? I think about this as we hit January and in our fitness goals, and all we see are these really curated bodies online. But we would have seen bodies. We would have seen people's rolls as they bent over in a creek to wash instead of these curated perfect poses. We would have seen humanity in all of its glorious truth and imperfection that is also perfectly perfect. And I think we would have known in this, oh, I'm not special. This person also experiences X, Y, and Z. And I've noticed that the more vulnerable I allow myself to be, the more I offer up my deeper shames, my deeper darknesses to others, the more I find mirrors in them that let me know in the most delicious way that I am not special. One of the examples I give of this is that I have some really intense looping thoughts that I thumb over and over and over again, right? It's Chuck Palahniuk's Marla, the sore in your mouth that would heal if you just stopped tonguing it from Fight Club, that I just go over it and over it again, these sort of loops that turn into vortexes. And I began sharing a little bit about that with some friends last summer. And what surprised me was that a lot of them echoed, if not a really similar situation, pieces of it. And something that I was deeply ashamed of because I thought it was different, suddenly became not different and not special in the best way. And I think that the beautiful thing about conversation, which is what this podcast has largely been over 100 episodes, it has been conversations that I hope uncover some truth and some vulnerability and some of the rawness and the pink underbelly of life. And I hope that within that, we are able to find how delicious it is that in our pain, we are not special and that we share this with others. We are not alone. And so for all the specialness that I have felt sometimes in what I must put myself through in order to be enough, right? It's when I recognize that I'm not the only one hiking up a mountain just to help me get through the shame. This is another conversation I recently had with a friend. We were hiking up a mountain and it was hard, and I made this crack that sometimes shame drives me up the mountain, and he cracked back that, yeah, well, how else were you going to get up there? And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody else thinks that? I thought I was the only one. I thought I was special. I'm so glad I'm not special because it means that I'm not alone. And I learned a lot about being alone the last 2 years. And I really want to deepen into a space of trying to find connection and not aloneness, not just physically, not just the presence of others, but also in how we feel. I do not want us to feel alone. I do not want us to feel that we are special in our hurts and our pains. Okay, so within that, I want to move on to lesson number 7, which is, I don't have a really salient way of summing this up, but it's that hope and despair are always present. And that I think that to some degree we get a choice. And this has actually I don't know that I would have included this as a lesson, but I have received so many messages, so many comments over the last year and a half of the podcast in particular, where some of you have expressed a really deep gratitude for the hope that I hold in conversations that often feel like maybe they're grim or a little bit hopeless. And that has absolutely meant the world to me. I absolutely want to give hope, especially as someone who has almost lost hope more times than I can count. I know what a precious resource hope is. And so the idea that you come here to hard conversations to find hope means the world to me. And we'll explore this a little bit more, the idea of how paradoxical we are as humans, that we're capable of holding multiple viewpoints at once. Because in real life, I am both this hopeful, starry-eyed idealist and the biggest wet blanket. I have a running joke that in my relationship, I am the wet blanket. I will give you 1,000 reasons why the thing that you just told me will not work. And I can be both, right? We can be both. And I want to say, though, that really at my core, I do believe in the kindness of humans, and not just our kindness, but the absolute potential of our empathy and our loving and our collaborative spirits. I come back to oftentimes guest Melanie Challenger's quote that our affiliative biology, our ability to love a skunk, a pig, a goat, a lizard as much as we love one another is one of our superpowers as humans. And I think that the potential of our empathy and loving and collaborative spirits, our ability to recognize ourselves in the web of life and act accordingly. And I know we don't always do that, but I really believe in our ability for it, because I think that all of that is possible. And I know that in so many of these conversations, that we're having writ large, it's really easy to see that once the momentum of apathy gets rolling, we can really bury our heads in the sand. We can ignore our senses. We can ignore even the most convincing of Cassandras in our midst, because we allow ourselves to be anesthetized and inured to what I think is a shifting baseline. We talked about this concept on the podcast where we never saw how it was. And so our baseline is so far removed, right? We were just talking about community. Well, if we've never lived in deep community and our baseline is a sort of nuclear family, then we don't even know what's possible. And so I think we can get so far down that shifted baseline that we don't know what's possible. And then we have this sort of apathetic momentum that sucks us down. And I think that can be true. And I do think that we have this ability to choose how we go forward. And I believe that that might actually really set us apart, that we get to choose. And again, I want to say it's not easy to choose. I don't think we choose it all the time. I think that we fall and get back up in our choosing of this, but I do think it's possible that we can choose to see and to find the potential and the goodness, all while not ignoring the bad. That's not, I'm not one of these people when my friends come to me with problems where I need to have a silver lining. Sometimes the suck just sucks. But I really do believe that there is so much potential in what it is to be human at this moment in time. And so I'm not sure how to really pull together lesson 7, but it's that hope and despair, they're here. They're here. They're ours to walk with, to play with, to become apprentice to understand. And like in this episode 98, that hope and that grief, they're necessary to one another. They fuel one another. Our grief for not having community is what fuels our hope and drive to build that same community. And so don't underestimate the power of these two together, our hope and our grief, our hope and our despair. I think with that, I actually want to call lesson number 8 that life happens in paradox. And this is one of the things that I've been learning about myself again and again throughout the last couple of years, is that me, whatever it is to be Kate, is unfolding in the tension of two things that seemingly don't align about me. Whether that's my hope and my grief, my idealism and wet blanketism, or anytime I'm caught, and it's often, between states that don't always make sense, right? I love freedom and I love structure. I am as serious as I am silly. I both respond and collapse in the face of pressure. And all of these things are a sort of paradoxical nature, but I live in the tension and the gray area between the two, that we are paradox, that if light can be both a wave and a particle, so can we. And instead of allowing one or the other to take us, when we can hold that tension, that tight string, I think, is the note that we pluck to create a really rich, resonant life. And so this is just a short one. Lesson number 8, like, we are paradoxes, and allow yourself to be such and to let that note of tension ring out, because that is where we create the depth of who we are. Okay. This kind of tugs at lesson number 9, which is we contain multitudes. So don't limit yourself. And so speaking of all of this space that we can hold between poles, between two seemingly opposing ideas, I want to talk about the multitudes that we can carry and about being multi-hyphenates, polymaths, all these words that I don't necessarily love, but it's really just getting at this idea that we are generalists, that we have interest in so many things, and to nurture that. And I don't really want to issue this one as advice, or any of these as advice, because I don't like advice. I don't like receiving it, and I don't like giving it, especially unsolicitedly. And I'm not sure that, honestly, this lesson number 9 is working out for me. But we live in a world that is constantly asking us to niche down. This is so important. We have algorithms that favor us when we have a category. We have jobs that want us to be ultra specialized. I think we even at this point have expectations for our friends to show up in one way and one facet of their existence. But we are so multitudinous, so vibrant. And I really believe that humans are natural generalists with a propensity towards becoming okay, maybe not great, this might get at enoughness, at a very wide variety of things, with a curiosity that can at times make us interested in everything. And David Epstein's book Range really tugs at this for me, but I want to say that again. We are natural generalists with a propensity towards becoming okay at a variety of things, with a curiosity that makes us interested in everything. And that is so beautiful. But I also know, sitting here in 2025 in your ears, almost like I'm right next to you, it makes it really hard. What do I do? How do I marry all these different interests in this moment of late stage capitalism in order to survive and maybe even thrive? And I have not answered that for myself, but I really have to believe for myself that why would we squelch that? I spent so many years as being Kate the Butcher, right? I own a butcher shop in Denver called Western Daughters, if you don't know. And I was always trying to move away from that title. And I still am sometimes. I feel that to be a butcher isn't to be taken seriously, but being a butcher has also opened up avenues of exploration to me that led me back to other things that I had been. In my teenage years, I was Kate who went to college, who was an academic for anthropology and biology and ecology, right? Well, I don't say it often. I am certified in holistic nutrition as a yoga teacher and those things too. I am somebody who loves to hike, to walk, and to lift weights recently. I'm also a writer. I am the host of this podcast. I am a supply chain nerd. I love crappy fantasy and horror books. I am a Stephen King enthusiast. I love talking about death as much as I love talking about domestic manufacturing. I can get really into a lot of different things, but right in that moment, I was thinking about machines and just how they work. Lately, I've been really into economics. I'm currently in the middle of an economics fellowship that is opening up so many different vistas for me. I love materials, I love ecology, and I love weaving all of it together under the guise of systems thinking. And I think in this space where everything wants us to have a label, to be this one thing that you market, it feels really hard to embrace the fact that we are many things and to find ways to weave that together. And again, I don't know if this is advice because I haven't quite found a way to do it, but I really believe in it. And the podcast to me is deeply representative of that fact because so many times people told me or society told me, but people in particular said that I should pick a niche, be just agriculture, be just health and wellness. And time and again, when I thought about doing that, I became so bored, so tired of doing that I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay with it and instead had to let my curiosity lead me into all of these different places to create the podcast I want to listen to that I don't feel exists in the world. And I am so grateful that I have allowed myself the space to take up space in all of my different interests and desires and curiosities. And I want to give us that permission slip to be all the things, to contain multitudes, to not be limited by the strictures of society, to not feel like you must niche down, to enjoy being okay at a multitude of things. Lesson number 10. It's a big one. Might be my biggest one in some ways. It's hard to say. Don't wait until you're not afraid to do the thing because you will never do it or almost never do it. This is a note about being ready. I used to wait to do things until I was ready, and I gauged my readiness by, at the minimum, a reduction in my fear around something. And, spoiler alert, I was never ready by those standards. I don't know if this is just the kind of anxious person that I am or if it's something else, but I have realized that the fear doesn't always lessen, and I'm never ready, so I might as well do the thing, go after the big dream, and go into the fear. And in episode 99 with Caroline, she reminds us of a Joseph Campbell sort of Jungian quote where he says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." And it is so true. And I am just a scared little hobbit in life, and adventure is frightening. And yet I know that the biggest adventures I've gone on this podcast, topping them, have held everything I have always been looking for, right? And I wasn't ready to do this podcast. I didn't feel expert enough. I didn't feel experienced enough in interviewing, and I felt scared to death to turn on the microphone. But I did it. I did it. And I am standing here 100 episodes later, and I am so glad that this is the decision that I made to go into that fear. And I would love to tell you that I am less nervous now, that when I turn on this mic, I feel a sense of confidence and peace, but that's not true. Oftentimes, I am just as nervous, just as scared as I was at the beginning. But there's a really big difference. I have built my ability to be with that fear, to hold that fear. I have built a toolbox that has taught me how to do things in spite of or with, in co-creation with the fear that I am constantly experiencing. And to keep showing up for myself through the fear. And I think that there is no more valuable lesson when we talk about going after our big dreams, that you must just live with and co-create with that fear and hope that maybe it settles. But then there will be another new thing that we are afraid to do, and we will have to go into that. And in that way, fear becomes a muscle that we are strengthening, that we are training so that we can move into it. Lesson number 11. Get back on the dang horse. My incredible coach says that there are lessons that we learn and then we sort of move on from, and then there are lessons that we spend our lives learning. And so far, this has been a lifelong lesson that I am learning, which is about falling and getting back up. I am someone who is prone to shutting down, to collapsing, and as I've been calling it lately, going full possum, which is another way of saying I drop balls. I drop text threads with dear friends. I disappear from the face of the earth. I drop work projects. And the more important they are to me, the more they mean to me, the more likely I am to drop them because, back to, we are paradoxes. And I have to keep getting back up. This podcast has gone on several accidental hiatuses where I have dropped balls, and because it is so dear to me, I felt like I could not pick them back up. I have not released episodes when I had contracts with sponsors and just felt devastated that I had let people down. I have had episodes with dear friends that I couldn't release because I was paralyzed by wanting to make sure that they were seen the way that I knew I would want to be seen. And I have just not been able to do this in some ways because it's so important to me. And those little accidental hiatuses, and I think I've kind of been on 3, maybe 4 since this podcast's inception, have meant that I've had to keep getting back on the dang horse. And I should have been at more than 100 episodes by now. But when I was ready to get back on the horse, I just committed to giving myself the grace that was necessary for me to get back on that horse or the wagon, whatever mixed metaphor you prefer. So much grace. It always requires so much grace for myself. Even this episode, right? It didn't come with all the bells and whistles I thought it would. And I just have to have grace for that. And it's not always easy. And I think it's really not easy. And maybe you're like me. And again, this is one of my deepest, darkest shames that I am sharing. You know, my joke is that when I fall off the wagon, or the horse, I fall into a canyon and into a well at the bottom of that canyon and into a sinkhole at the bottom of that well. I fall hard, I fall deep, I fall beyond the reach of light. And it is always a steep climb back up to get back on the horse for me. My horse is thousands of feet above me and many different sheer rock faces and well walls above me. And if we're going with a ball analogy here, I don't just drop a ball. I chuck it out of an airplane and then have to parachute down to go find it. And in this proclivity towards collapse that I have never really finished anything in my life. Not my degree, not many projects that I have started. In many ways, Josh took over Western Daughters when I couldn't finish it. I don't even finish TV shows that I love. The more important it is, the less likely I am to finish it. We can talk about how I still have 6 episodes of 30 Rock that I have never watched. But this little podcast, I have kept going longer than anything in my life. And when I fell down, when I collapsed, when I went full possum, eventually I gave myself the grace to get back on the horse, so many mixed metaphors, and do the thing. And this is a lesson that we get back on the dang horse and we give ourselves grace. And as a note, I am really appreciative of the people in my life that have given me grace when I've disappeared, gone dark, fallen off the wagon, because this has been hard on a lot of relationships in my life. And so grace is something that I hope I have to offer as a friend, and something that I am learning to give myself. And again, I find it easier to give to others than I do to myself, but we have to get back on the dang horse. And sometimes you stutter in trying, you fall off immediately again, you have to get back up. It's not always pretty. It's not always how you thought it would look, but you get back on the dang horse. And I think with that is maybe lesson number 12, which is a forever lesson for me, which is to take things one step at a time, that you can't believe how much ground you can traverse if you just put one foot in front of the other. And this is something that I have learned I've been a walker my whole life since childhood. I have been walking a lot and a hiker my whole adulthood. And most of that is because it allowed me a playground to learn that I could support myself in an imbalance, right? Each step that we take, we're sort of teetering on the edge of our being. We're out of balance. We're on one foot, and we catch ourselves as we take that step forward. And that lesson of constantly falling and catching myself and making one step and then another step towards what feels like this massive distance. And it's amazing what you can traverse with just one step at a time. When I stand at my mountain that I hike several times a week or more, I can see the top and it feels really far off in the distance at the beginning. And I'm always amazed when I'm standing at the top looking at where I came from. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that. I just walked 3, 4, 5 miles, one step at a time. And it carried me. I carried me all the way here. And that is incredible. And so I think with that, one step at a time remains, I think, some of the best wisdom I have to offer. And the thing about the best wisdom, as you'll find in these lessons that I've learned, but that you don't have to learn. You don't take this as advice, please. But that they're oftentimes cliches for a reason. That some of that salient advice that transcends age and generation is such because it works. And one step at a time, teach yourself that you're there to catch yourself with one step at a time. Teach yourself how far you can go by just making one single step. And don't focus on that distance. Just focus on the next step, and the next step, and the next step, and the next breath. And pretty soon you will have carried yourself further than your wildest dreams. I really believe that. Lesson number 13 is about integrity. And it's about the mixed bag of integrity. I mean, so much of this, right, was about the mixed bag. It was about the both and. And if you know me and you've listened to this podcast, you know I love the both and integrity. Whew, this is something that has got in my way. It's gotten in my way so many times throughout this podcast, my own integrity, but it has also driven me to create the podcast I wanted to see that wasn't there in the world. It has held me committed to a level of quality that I truly believe, and this is hard for me to say, I don't like to toot my own horn, I really believe this podcast is different. I really believe that it has something to offer that I haven't seen very many places, and that it deserves to take up bigger spaces in this world because of it. And it is my driving, flogging towards integrity that has made that my commitment to spending 20, 30 hours of research per guest oftentimes, that I think has created a container for conversations to be deeper, to be wider ranging, to be more connective across industries. But it has also gotten the better of me. It has also, my integrity has also been the place that if I fall short of, that I freeze up, that I collapse, that I go full possum because it wasn't good enough. And if it's not good enough, I can't put it out in the world to be seen. That that drive from childhood to go in the corner and only come out when it's perfect has been very hard to do, and something that is an evolving organism. And sometimes when it fell short of that perfection, when I fell short of that perfection, I froze up. And so integrity has been a double-edged sword, like so many of these things for this podcast. But ultimately, I come back to this idea that the opposite of to integrate is to disintegrate. That we must create connectivity between all of these different things. We must integrate these lessons into ourselves, lest we atomize and do 1,000 particles and shatter. And maybe that's important too, right? I described what happened to me this summer as a sort of shattering. That when I watched that branch break on that tree, I saw it shatter into thousands of splinters on the ground. And I know that those splinters of wood will make their way into the soil and grow more mycelium and create more connectivity. And so maybe both are important for us to integrate and to disintegrate. But I did want to leave this note around integrity with you and its complexity. My last piece here is not a lesson so much as it is an observation, which is that the challenges and triumphs that we face as individuals are often mirrored in greater collective societal spaces. And that as we've explored some of, I think, the big hurdles and problems that we face as a society, especially in the last year or so, that so many of what I just said can be true for the collective as much as the individual. That when we stay awake to our curiosity, that when we let the wind change our shape, we don't get stuck, right? As David Graeber says, we're like a record that's gotten stuck on a player, right? That when we have persistence in our actions, when we let certain things be enough, when we collectively recognize that we're not special, when we allow for hope and grief, when we allow for integrity to be multiple spaces, when we live in the tension of paradox, when we do the thing, when we try on these different shapes for what society might look like, knowing that they might not work perfectly, but maybe we can learn something, right? There's so much in here that applies as above, so below. And these are just a snapshot. Again, I don't want these lessons to be prescriptive. I don't want them to feel like advice. I want them to feel like me sharing the truth of what it has meant to bring this dream into 100 episodes, and some of the ways in which it has helped me live well beyond these 100 episodes. That who I am 100 episodes later is a completely different person than who I was at episode 1. And I'm so grateful for that. And these lessons felt to me like some of the things that have allowed me to step into this person. And I stepped into this version, right? 100 episodes later, this Kate right here, right now. one step at a time, one episode at a time, one guest at a time, one book at a time, one turning on of the mic at the time, even though I was scared shitless. It was one at a time. It didn't happen all together. And whatever you and I, dear listener, are building together with this podcast, with your precious attention that I am so grateful for, we are doing it one episode at a time. These explorations of culture, of supply chains, of agriculture, of people, of relationships, of community, of all of the different things that are the multitudes that are contained within this podcast, and within us, between us, you and me. It's so much, and I just really want to thank you for being here for me for 100 episodes, and I can't wait to create the next 100 episodes with you. I hope you're ready for a ride. And again, if you would be so generous as to post this on social media, post your favorite episode, post about the show, and look for ways to support coming up. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Redmond Real Salt, and catch you on the flip side. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right, All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right, All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.